I wanted to take some time, since I am unable to attend the AAACS Conference, to talk a little bit about my work as one of the presenters in curriculum development in the Dr. Henderson text, Reconceptualizing Curriculum Development, specifically my work on Chapter 8, which is deliberative conversation, inspiriting teaching through mythopoetic inspiration. And so hopefully from home, I can provide some insights as to first my lead learning journey on the topic, what I came to understand of the topic as a lead learner, but as a novice to mythopoetic curriculum theory prior to this, and then to delve into my own personal experiences and how that helped me to write this particular chapter, which I think first and foremost hopefully does inspire teaching and to breathe life back into teaching, and secondly to empower teachers, because I don't think that I'm the only one who believes that we are in a time of great disempowerment of practicing teachers. So while I will try to first and foremost talk about curriculum theory, I will also talk about why I believe this was a powerful text, and particularly my work with it for practicing teachers, because as Dr. Henderson has pointed out in other texts, I think that we tend to undervalue or not appreciate the capacity for teachers to engage in intellectual work. And that was really one of the reasons why I became involved in this project. I was invited to write this chapter by Dr. Henderson, and Jennifer Schneider, who is another author, was very instrumental in assisting me, but I was not necessarily familiar at all with mythopoetic curriculum theory prior to working on this chapter. They invited me to get involved because I had worked very extensively with the National Writing Project, and so through that work, they felt that I would be a good fit to be the lead learner on this chapter. So I began this journey first by looking at the Understanding Democratic Curriculum Leadership book, the 1999 book by Dr. Henderson and Kathleen Kesson. And I read Kathleen's chapter on mythopoetic curriculum theory. And that was really the foundation of my understanding of what constituted mythopoetic curriculum theory. I also looked at the work of Nelson Hagerson Jr. And Dwayne Huebner. Those were probably the three that were most instrumental in my understanding of what mythopoetic curriculum theory was. I've spoken with others in curriculum theory, not necessarily practitioners, but as I said, true curriculum theorists, and they questioned why I didn't look more at the work of Carl Jung, and that wasn't necessarily my lens. My lens was to look at mythopoetic curriculum theory as really what the root of the word was. First, the creation, mythos, and poiesis, creation of a story. So I was looking at narratives, not necessarily deconstructing teacher narratives or myths like Nelson Hagerson Jr. I was looking at how teachers can use writing specifically to empower or to inspirit their own teaching and to author their own stories. And I think Mary Aswell-Dahl, she sort of begins to, allude to that a bit in her work too, the power of fiction. And so I did read Dahl as well. But again, I don't want to claim a man's well of expertise, but when I began writing the chapter, it made sense to me why I would look at my work through the National Writing Project to inspire the chapter, because I do believe in Huebner's notion that teaching has vocational aspects, and having gone to Catholic schools, I don't necessarily think that it's a spiritual aspect, although there's a spirituality to it, doesn't necessarily have to be to a particular organized religion, but that we are called to do what we do. It's quite a bit different than other professions. And so I did feel that calling when I chose education, but the National Writing Project, which I did, I believe in my 5th year of teaching, it really called me back to why this was something that I wanted to do. Because in some capacity, we did demythologize the notion that the teacher was sort of this deliverer of standards. We looked first at our own writing, and the philosophy of the National Writing Project is that teachers should be comfortable with themselves as writers. And to a large extent, that is to empower teachers so that they can, again, author their own futures in the classrooms and author the notions of what constitutes the profession of teaching. So I reflected back on my experiences, first as they pushed us into the notion of teachers as writers, second as they went on to create a community of teachers. And it has been said that as teachers we are in private practice. Too often we do not collaborate with one another, and as a result, I think, and as Pinar's alluded to, it's easier to push and to impact education from the outside when we ourselves have not collaborated to discuss what our notions of curriculum are and our notions of what the profession should constitute. So that was very powerful for me, to have that community of teachers who viewed themselves as professionals, who were there for 6 weeks in the summer, 8 to 3. They weren't the typical, I guess, teacher that I was used to working with, in the sense that they were willing to give so much of themselves. Not to say that every teacher can't do that, but there was something special about the teachers who chose to do the National Writing Project. And that sense of not only authoring our own individual work, and we wrote, as Dahl suggests, we wrote in fiction, we wrote in poetry, we also were encouraged to write nonfiction pieces for professional journals to talk about our practices so that other people would know what we were doing. So we were story creating in the sense that we were rewriting our notions of what it constituted to be a teacher. So when I came back to that, it made complete sense that this aligns with this spiritual notion of teaching, the emotional aspects of teaching, both with students and with others, this sense of a calling, this sense that there's almost a magic at times when we work with students, that there is something that cannot be quantified or evaluated, that there is something that is particularly unique and perhaps spiritual in the work that we do. And so that was how I approached my investigation of mythopoetic curriculum theory, was to look at it through my own lenses after reading several different authors in the field and looking at different notions of teaching as a calling, teaching as spirituality, teaching as emotional connection, which Parker Palmer investigates very deeply. I also looked at this notion of transformative learning, which is Mesereau, but John Dirks did look at the mythopoetic side of transformative learning. And again, do I claim a mantle of expertise on transformative learning theory? No, I don't. But it was something that I definitely looked at for this. I also think it is worthwhile to look at Clendenin and Connolly's work in narrative inquiry, because there is an empowerment in teachers telling their own stories there. And again, this notion of reauthoring, when teachers try to capture this magical relationship or this spiritual connection, they can begin to fully round our work and make the work that we do more human, because I feel that we are in a very dehumanized time in the classroom. And I think that sometimes we are encouraged, and I do mention this in the chapter, we're encouraged to really leave ourselves at the door when we come in to teach. However, I think that our relationship with students is so much fuller and rounder when we bring our full emotional selves and we reveal our full emotional selves to our students. And one of the ways that we can do this and still have our jobs is to show that we are writers and also lovers of books, particularly lovers of fiction, because fiction allows us to connect with other humans and with students and with other colleagues in a very deep, again, emotional, spiritual way. So, although I also say in the chapter, you can definitely utilize elements of mythopoetic inspiration in all curricular areas. A good friend of mine, like I said, I remember her coming into at the time I had an office, and she was talking so excitedly about graphing calculators. I've also seen students and teachers be wildly thrilled by science, but in my own particular experience, it was through sharing writing, particularly the writing of poetry, and by sharing and talking about fiction, that I found the inspiration that I later went back and realized through this lead learning work was mythopoetic inspiration with students. So I do believe that we can empower ourselves if we look at our own stories, which Nelson Hagerson Jr. suggests. But I also believe that in digging into our own narratives, we must construct new ones. One of the ways to do so is through writing. It doesn't necessarily have to be through a narrative. It can even be through professional publications, but writing humanizes the work that we do. It does provide an opportunity to, as the National Council of Teachers of English has suggested, that we sort of take back the profession. And one way to take back the profession from people who simply quantify the profession is through the qualitative and through the narrative. And I believe that that is possible. And that is what inspired my chapter on mythopoetic curriculum theory.